But hey, if we have not met, my name is Josh. I'm one of the pastors here at Mission Hill Church, and we're so happy you're here with us this morning. I have a question for you, and as you have seen from the pieing in the face and from our announcement video, we like fun and we like participation. So when I ask this question, no, it is not rhetorical. Please shout out your answers, okay? So here's the deal. What is something that is like science fiction or you saw in a movie or read in a book that you wished was real? Lightsabers, okay? Time machine? What was that? Laser beams? That's basically a lightsaber, Justin, okay? Anything else? Flying cars? Warp drive. Okay. So we've got a lot of Star Wars themed responses, which is helpful because I was actually going to reference Star Wars, which is great. Good job, everybody. That was spontaneous and nice. Good job. Hey, so there's this moment in Star Wars Episode 7. Anybody seen Star Wars Episode 7? It's the seventh one that came out, which has not always been true based on numbers of Star Wars, just for any of you who have watched that. But Star Wars Episode 7? Yeah, it's The Force Awakens. Okay, so there's this scene where Rey, the main character, and Finn are on the Millennium Falcon, and they don't really know what the Millennium Falcon is. They aren't sentimental or nostalgic about it like we are, but they're just hanging out. And then they meet Han Solo. And Han Solo walks in, and he's got all this stuff that goes on. They have this adventure or whatever, and they're wondering, are Jedi and the Force, is it real? Did it actually happen, or is it just legends? Because, they just think it's legends. It happened a long time ago. It was something they've heard about, but there's no way it could be true. And Han Solo says a very, very interesting thing in return. He says it's real. All of it. It's real. All of it. And that's the theme of today. What if it's all true? What if it's all real? What if everything that was written about in the scriptures is not just a cool story, but is reality? The last couple of weeks, we've kind of created a trilogy of our own of this series, and we've called it The King is Here. And in the first week, Jesus shows up in Samaria, and he goes and talks to this woman at a well in the middle of the day, and he tells her everything she's ever done, both the good and the bad. And then he reveals that he's the Messiah, the one that is to come, that is to save the people of Israel. He's the guy that the scriptures have all been talking about over and over and over and over again. He's the Messiah, the Christ, the one who will come and take away the sins of the world. And he reveals it to this Samaritan woman who was an outcast of the outcast. In John's gospel, it's the first time this is declared. It's this beautiful moment. He goes out of his way. He had to talk to this woman. Then last week, we talked about his triumphal entry, how he entered into Jerusalem to the shouts and the praises of the people, and then the Pharisees got angry and they were unhappy with him. And then he goes to the temple and he quotes the prophets of old, calling out the religious leaders for their sin and their wickedness of obstructing the people from coming to God. And the story tells us that in that moment, in Luke's gospel, it tells us in that moment they planned to kill him. And there's a bunch of stuff that happens over that week. And let me just tell you that we don't have time to talk about all of it, but some of it's really, really cool. Basically, Jesus goes around doing good and making the religious people angry over and over and over and over and over and over again until they literally send soldiers to arrest him, to murder him. He does some awesome stuff, like he goes to the temple and this woman is offering just 2 pennies in the offering, and then the religious people come in and they dump all their money in. And he says, that woman, she gave all she had. Those people, their offering is not what this woman's was. He gets into numerous theological debates with these people about the scriptures and the prophets. He gets into all this stuff. It's really interesting. At one point, he even blames the high priests and their ancestors for murdering the prophets. He was like, you guys are responsible. Just heads up, when you accuse people and their parents of murdering people, they get mad and want to kill you, apparently. Just the thing. So this is the lead up, the moment leading into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at the arrest and the trial of Jesus. I know Peter's going to deny Jesus 3 times somewhere in there, but we're not going to talk about that today. There's just too many details from the arrest to the resurrection that we can't cover them all. There's so many little details and nuances and things that the scriptures are trying to teach us. So read them, read all the stories. This morning I went through and read the Gospels and just this section of the scriptures because it's so powerful. But today we're going to look at John's Gospel. And I like how John writes. John writes to teach us something, and all the other Gospels do too. But he themes how he frames narratives to teach us. So I want to start with the arrest of Jesus. So there's this moment where Jesus exits the city, and he goes out to this garden, and in the other Gospels it tells us it's the Garden of Gethsemane, and they go out to this garden and they're praying. Though John's Gospel doesn't record what they prayed, you can read about it in the other ones. But it tells us that Roman soldiers and the temple guards come accompanied by Judas to arrest Jesus. They bring an army to arrest 11 guys and Jesus. Which, to be fair, in hindsight, trying to arrest God, you probably should bring an army, okay? In hindsight. They didn't know that, but in hindsight. Here's what the scriptures tell us. Jesus fully realized all that was going to happen to him, so he stepped forward and met them. Who are you looking for? He asked. Jesus the Nazarene, they replied. I am he, Jesus said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. As Jesus said, I am he. They all drew back and fell to the ground. Which that might seem strange, but John is trying to emphasize a point here. He says, I am he. So Jesus is actually calling back to that moment in the burning bush. Anybody heard that story about Moses and that bush that was on fire, but it didn't burn up, and then God spoke out of it? Wild story. But in that moment, God says, when he's asked about what his name is, God says, I am that I am. It's God saying, I am defined only by me. And he uses that phrase, and John is very careful to record this phrase because Jesus is telling you, I am God. And then they ask again. He says, who did you come to arrest? Why are you here? Who are you looking for? They say, Jesus of Nazareth, and he says, I am he. They then come forward to arrest him. Peter kind of gets mixed signals, I guess. He was reading the situation incorrectly and chops off a dude's ear. And then Jesus tells him to stop. Other Gospels tell us that Jesus picks the ear up and puts it on the man's head, and he miraculously heals him. Then, so that he gets arrested. Then he goes to Annas' house. And Annas is the former high priest. His son-in-law, Caiaphas, is now the high priest. But Annas still gets the title of high priest in the scriptures, similarly to how presidents who are no longer president in office are still called president. It's kind of that sort of thing. And he goes to Annas' house. He's bound and he's restrained and he's brought before him, and they start questioning him. What are you teaching? What are you teaching? What are you teaching? And Jesus replies, hey, I've been teaching in public the whole time. Just go ask some people. And then a temple guard strikes Jesus across the face and said, is that any way to speak to the high priest? Ironically, he slaps God, who the high priest should be serving, to tell him not to talk to the high priest that way, who should be serving God, who he just slapped. It's a very ironic situation. But Jesus replies and he says, go get witnesses. You know why he asks for witnesses? Because that's in the law of Moses. 2 people would have to confirm the story that Jesus had actually been blaspheming for Jesus to be accused and to be charged. Jesus is saying, hey, you guys who don't understand how justice works according to the law of Moses, go get some witnesses because it's the only way you can rightfully convict me. So they get mad, tie him up, and give him to Caiaphas. They don't get witnesses. Then they go to Caiaphas. And Caiaphas has grabbed the entire Sanhedrin, which is basically the Jewish high council, and it's like the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all these people who are religious teachers who seem to know everything, but seem to not miss just about everything about the story. He goes and gets them. And it's interesting, John's gospel doesn't record a single bit of the interrogation. But he does tell us that it's early in the morning by this point. Jesus got arrested at night. He's now stayed up all night being interrogated and questioned in front of the Jewish high council. And they go and take him to the Roman governor, whose name is Pontius Pilate. And it's interesting here in this story is that at this point, Rome has taken over basically, a good part of the world. And there hasn't been a king, and I say that in air quotes because King Herod, who you hear about at the beginning of the Jesus story when he's born, King Herod is just a puppet king of Rome. He's not a real king. He doesn't have sovereignty. But since Herod the Great is how history refers to him, King Herod died in about 4 BC. There has been no king in Israel. He divides the kingdom up into his sons, and they kind of are each rulers over their areas. But Pilate is the governor. He's the one that answers to Rome. He's the one in charge. So over the course of this time, there has been no king for 30 years in Israel. So they take him before Pilate. And interestingly enough, they won't even enter Pilate's house because it'll make them unclean. So they're being very religious, very hey, I'm going to abide by the rules. I'm not going to do anything that will keep me from being able to perform the ceremonies required because they're in the middle of these feast seasons, and it's in the middle of Passover. So they have to remain ceremonially clean so they won't go into Pilate's house. Though they want to murder a guy, they want to stay ceremonially clean. So Jesus is taken into question by Pilate, and Pilate said this, "So you are a king?" Jesus responded, "You say I'm a king?" Exactly. I was born and came into this world. Actually, I was born and came into this world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize what I say is true. And Pilate may give the most cynical response anyone can respond with. What is truth? Pilate asked. You see, during this whole conversation, Pilate's like, hey, he's not guilty. They're like, hey, we want to put you to death. We want to put this guy to death. Rome can only put people to death, so I need Pilate's permission to put him to death. But he keeps going, hey, this guy is not guilty of anything that I would put him to death for. But this is going to be a foreshadowing of a moment that comes later, because the truth doesn't matter to Pilate. Just like the truth doesn't matter to the religious leaders. What is truth? Pilate asked. Then he went out again and told them, he is not guilty of any crime, but you have a custom of asking me to release one prisoner each year at Passover. Would you like me to release this King of the Jews? But they shouted back, no, not this man. We want Barabbas. Barabbas was a revolutionary. Barabbas had tried to overthrow Rome. And this is a picture of the Messiah that these people want. They want the guy that tried to overthrow Rome. They want the guy who led an insurrection against Rome. They do not want the guy who would free their souls from sin. They do not want the king who has actually arrived. They want a counterfeit who simply wants to take over and probably just turn into the oppressor that he got rid of. Jesus doesn't commit any crimes. He doesn't do anything that is actually death-worthy. He's not guilty of anything. And yet, they send him to be flogged. They put a robe on his shoulders. They put this crown of thorns on his head. And here's what they say. Mockingly, but they say, "Hail, King of the Jews." Again, the irony is dripping in these scenes of the king who actually is crowned, who is himself declared King of the Jews, but it's only mockingly, but they don't know that mockingly they're declaring the truth. So Pilate again brings him out, declares him not guilty. He brings him out in this get-up, this mocking get-up. And he wants to release him. He does. Everything that we see in scriptures is that Pilate does not want to murder this dude. But the religious leaders shout all the louder. There's something I didn't notice until I read it this year. I had always pictured like a giant mob of people that were just random people shouting for the death of Jesus. But it's the religious leaders and the temple guards that have brought him here. They're the ones standing in front of Pilate. Yeah, they may have gotten a few people to chip in and help, but it was the religious leaders that are chanting, "Crucify him, crucify him." The people that are supposed to be upholding the law, supposed to be taking care of righteousness and justice in the world, they are the ones shouting to crucify God. And they go, "He has to be put to death because he claimed he was the Son of God." And Pilate freaks out at this, actually. He freaks out. He's like, whoa. He's a Roman, right? And Roman mythology sees their gods show up in human form all the time. Like they show up and they hang out all the time. So he's freaked out. He thinks this could be like a legit thing. And he's trying to ask Jesus, "Where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from?" And Jesus won't give him any concrete answer. He won't do anything to help him out. And he says, "Don't you know I have the right to crucify you?" Then Jesus said this, "You would have no power over me at all unless it was given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." And this is interesting because Pilate would have perceived that as Caesar is the one that gives me power, therefore that's why I have power. But if Caesar didn't give me power, then I wouldn't have any power. That's what he thinks Jesus is saying. What Jesus is actually saying is, if I hadn't allowed you here because I'm God and I'm really the one in control and I'm really the one that allows Caesar to be in control for this moment, for this time, for right now, that unless I said so, you wouldn't even have the right to crucify me. But obviously that goes over Pilate's head. Then Pilate tried to release him. Also, quick note, he handed him over, the one has committed the greater sin. Commentators believe that's not Judas, because Judas in John's gospel kind of disappears after the arrest. He just kind of vanishes. They think it's actually Caiaphas because it's this indictment on the high priest who is supposed to be upholding the law. And yet, in the midst of all that, he is wicked. Then Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders shouted, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar," which basically meant it was like a title of like loyalty, that you were a friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar, which would have been true. It was now about noon on the day of preparation for the Passover, and Pilate said to the people, "Look, here is your king." "Away with him," they yelled. "Away with him, crucify him." Then Pilate is very interesting response. "What? Crucify your king?" It's like he's telling them, like, you, even though he's mocking, he's like, will you declare that you are willing to crucify your own king? And here's the most convicting thing about what the high priest and the leader of religious law taught or said. "We have no king but Caesar." The leading priest shouted back. Then Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified. Pilate has no backbone, and he has no belief. John's gospel goes out of his way to tell us that both the Jewish and the Romans are guilty of his death. And I think, quite honestly, they're trying to communicate that the Jewish and the Gentile are both guilty of Jesus' death. And by extension, you and I. When we long for our own way, when we long to do what's right in our own eyes, we are dethroning Jesus. And we're putting Caesar up instead. Because what is Caesar? He's just you and I with power. So then the story goes, and Pilate's allows Jesus to be taken and crucified on a cross, which was the Romans' tool of execution. It was intentionally cruel. And he's displayed on a hill. And the Romans did this, they did it in public places to deter other revolutionaries from trying to rise up and take over Rome, to free their lands. And ironically, there's this verse that Jesus says, and he says that if I would be exalted, I will draw all men to me. And Rome and the temple guards do it for him. And I think Pilate's a little annoyed that they kind of question his loyalty to Caesar. So he does something that I would describe as petty, but I also find it really, really entertaining. He makes a sign and he puts it on top of Jesus' cross, and it says, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." And the religious leaders are like, "No, it just says that he said he was the King of the Jews." And he's like, "No, what was written is written." And then Jesus has this moment with, they give him sour wine to drink. And as he's about to take his last breath, this is what the scriptures say. When Jesus tasted it, the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. This is the moment where Jesus dies. And this is the moment that Jesus completes exactly what he set out to do. And you might be looking at me going like, how does anyone set out to die? How does anyone set out to arrive at this place? And how could he possibly been in control of that moment? And it's interesting how John's gospel phrases everything, because he's telling you Jesus is dictating the course the whole way. When he arrives, when the soldiers arrive to arrest him, who asks the first question in John's gospel? Jesus. Who are you looking for? He steps forward and says, who are you looking for? Answer me. He even tells the soldiers, just arrest me, let these men go. He's dictating the whole course the entire time. He then goes to Annas' house and he's interrogated by him, and Annas is doing all these things and questioning and doing this stuff. And he goes, don't you remember the law? You need witnesses. And so they take him to the Sanhedrin, where witnesses will be provided. I mean, fake witnesses, false witnesses, liars, yes. He will stand in front of the Sanhedrin and the high priest, the current reigning high priest Caiaphas, and they will take him then to Pilate. And in front of Pilate, he'll be asked, are you a king? That's what you said, is what Jesus replies, because Jesus is far more than a king. Then Pilate, in his attempt to teach Jesus his lesson and then let him go, sends him to be flogged and mocked, putting his royal robe on him and his coronation, his crown being placed on his head. Then Jesus tells Pilate, you couldn't crucify me if you wanted to. It's my choice. The authority was given to you by me so that you could crucify me. Then there's that moment on the cross, the confirmation that he has accomplished exactly what he wanted to. It is finished. And here's what I want to tell you this morning. That this story of the king come to die, this story of all these moments where Jesus is actually in charge of his own destiny. It's important that we know that he's in charge and that he's going exactly where he intended to go, because that means that he went there just for the exact reason, just like he did with the Samaritan woman at the well, where he went out of his way to go where he had to go. This is the other thing he had to do. He had to go to the cross because he had to go and be the sacrifice for our sins, to be the thing that takes all the guilt and all the shame from us. It's not unironic that it's the Passover. It's not unironic that he does it this week. It's not this moment that it just happens to be this week. And there's so many details we can't go into today. But here's what I'm telling you, that the king came to die for you specifically. Unlike any other king, unlike any other ruler, he is not concerned about being dignified, or he's not concerned about his own life. He's concerned for you. The king is here, and he's here for you. And it'd be wrong to end there, right? It is Easter after all. So John's gospel tells us that Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb and he finds it empty with the linens sitting there. Because there was a person in the Sanhedrin that didn't agree. His name was Joseph. And so when Jesus died, he said, hey, I'm going to bury him in my tomb. That's why the song we just sang, it was borrowed for 3 days. Because Jesus didn't buy a burial plot for himself. He knew he wasn't going to need it. He's not there. And then she goes and tells the disciples, and in John's gospel, it tells us that John and Peter are in kind of like a sprinting match to see who can get there first. It's really funny. John arrives first, but Peter goes in first. So I don't know who won. But they don't see him anywhere. And then there's this beautiful story right after that. And here's basically what happens. Mary Magdalene sees these angels and she's distraught. She's like, where have they taken him? Where did they take his body? Because she thinks he's still dead, but that his body was stolen. And then this man that she can't quite recognize says, Mary, why are you crying? And she says, they have taken my Lord. The scriptures tell us she doesn't realize that it's Jesus talking to her. And here's the one word he speaks. Mary. And in that moment, she realizes the exalted King is standing in front of her. And she shouts out, Rabboni, which means teacher. It takes one word for her to see the King for who he is. And just know that this Mary Magdalene, it's by no happenstance that he appears before her. The Gospels don't do anything by accident. He appears before her, and he says her name. And similar to the Samaritan woman at the well, Mary Magdalene's had her issues in the past as well, but she was a disciple of the King. She was with him the whole time. And he appears to her and says her name, and she falls on her, or she reaches out and grabs him, right? I guess according to the scripture, she reaches out and grabs him. And he says, don't cling to me yet. I'm going to be with my Father. It's this moment where he's telling us it's for the individual that he came. He came for each and every one of us. He came for me and all my sins, all my mess ups, everything that I've screwed up in my life. Jesus came to forgive those things, to become the righteous system of forgiveness in our world, to make all that was wrong right again, to fix every broken thing. Because Rome wasn't fixing anything, and the high priests weren't fixing anything. So God said, let me do it myself. So we come back to that question from the beginning. What if it's all real? What if it's all true? How many times as a kid did I want Spider-Man to be real? How many times did I have that dream at night of me swinging between buildings in New York City? How many times, be honest here, were you sitting in your bed reaching out with the force to turn off the light switch? I've definitely done that. How many times did you long for something that you knew was fiction to be reality? And yet we treat this story sometimes like it's fiction. When it's reality, longing for us to remember it, longing for us to see it. So the band's going to come up and we're going to close out real fast, but I want you to know that the King came for you. And I want you to know that after that moment where he appears to Mary, he appears to some other people as well, and then he ascends to heaven. And here's the beautiful thing. He says, I'm going to come back. I'm not like doing this and ditching and being like, you guys fend for yourselves. I forgave your sins. Now go live. He doesn't say that. He says, no, I'm coming again. And in the scriptures, it talks about this really cool metaphor of the bride and the groom, that Jesus is the groom coming for his bride, those who follow him, those who believe in him, who have confessed their sins. In Romans, Paul tells us, and Paul's the guy who doesn't believe this whole time. In fact, he persecutes the church early on, and he's doing all these terrible things of putting people to death because they believe in Jesus. And then Jesus encounters him on a road. He is present in Paul's life, and it changes him dramatically. And this is what it says in the scriptures in Paul's writing to the Romans. If you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. That all your wrongs will be erased. That all the guilt and shame of the past will be gone. And that one day, just like that other revolutionary on the cross who's being murdered next to Jesus, you will be with him in paradise. This is the story of the gospel. That God became man. Told everybody how they were wrong the whole time in the most beautiful way. And then dies, comes back to life, and ascends to the Father. That's the thing that we base our entire existence on as Christians. That Jesus didn't stay dead. That the King didn't just come to die. He came to die and rise again. We're going to sing a song called The King is Here. And it's written like that because Jesus did not just come to be exalted and be sent back to heaven, but he is present in our lives daily. And so when we sing The King is Here, we mean the presence of the King is in this room. Not like metaphorically, not like maybe on a good day, like we mean he's here now. So what if it's all true? What if it's real? Let's pray. God, thank you that every year we get to celebrate Easter, but every day we get to celebrate Easter. That we get to celebrate our lives hinging on this moment today. God, thank you that you are so good and you are so kind. Hey, if there's anybody here who's not made that decision to follow Jesus with their life yet, it's as simple as that prayer from the book of Romans. You believe in your heart and you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you'll be saved. And normally I'm not a hands raised kind of guy, but with everybody with their heads bowed and their eyes closed, only me looking around, if that's a decision you want to make today, just slip your hand up. If that's a decision that you want to change in your life, just slip your hand up. And let's all pray this prayer together. God, I've messed up. I've made mistakes. But God, I know you forgive. Today, I want to follow you with my life. I know I won't be perfect, but every day, I'm going to chase after you. Thank you for your forgiveness. In your name we pray. Amen. Hey, this morning, have you made that decision, whether you raised your hand or not? It's the best day of your life. It's the best moment of your life. Because this King, this Jesus, came for you. He came for you. He came for you.